perfect family facade shattered. The shocking foster family massacre. Before we dive in, kindly hit the subscribe button and let us know where you are watching from in the comment. It started with a photograph. A bright, sun-drenched family portrait taken on the front lawn of a white two-story home in rural Missouri. In the photo, you'd see 5 children smiling stiffly in matching Sunday clothes, lined up in front of a modest but well-kept house. Their foster parents, Tom and Marlene Whitaker, stood behind them, arms around the children's shoulders, radiating the kind of warmth you'd expect from a model foster home brochure. But what the photo didn't show was the basement. What it didn't capture was the secret. And what no one could have guessed was that, within 3 weeks of that photo being taken, 3 of those children would be dead, and the others would vanish. This wasn't just a murder case. It was a complete unraveling of everything a community thought it knew about the perfect family next door. 911 received the call at 2:13 a.m. on a cold February morning. The caller was a neighbor, Susan Holloway, who lived across the street. She said she heard screaming, followed by what she described as a thud so loud, it shook my window. When officers arrived at 2:27 a.m., the front door of the Whitaker home was wide open. Lights were still on in the hallway. A faint smell of bleach lingered in the air. And inside, silence. Until they reached the basement door. The stairs creaked. Officer Ramirez, the first on the scene, later testified that he felt something unnatural in the air, like death was hiding in the walls. At the bottom of the stairs, he found blood fresh, still wet, pooling at the base of a steel table. On the floor were the bodies of 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, estimated between 8 and 12 years old. The scene was gruesome. Each had suffered blunt force trauma to the head. One girl's hands were bound with duct tape. The boy had bruises up and down his arms. There were signs of a struggle, but oddly, no blood trail leading up or down the stairs. Almost as if this had happened here and only here. The parents were gone. So were 2 of the foster kids. The house had no signs of forced entry. No broken windows. No doors ajar besides the front. But what detectives found in the master bedroom was chilling. 2 packed duffel bags. $12,800 in cash. For burner phones. A printed bus schedule with routes to Mexico City highlighted. They hadn't just run. They had planned to. Tom Whitaker, 49, was a respected youth pastor. His wife, Marlene, 47, taught Sunday school. They had been foster parents for nearly 15 years. Over that time, they had taken in 28 children. The local paper had once called them God's hands on earth. But it didn't take long for a different picture to emerge. A few weeks before the murders, Child Protective Services received an anonymous tip alleging abuse in the Whitaker household. The caller claimed the children were being locked in the basement for discipline, and that screams could be heard at night. The file was still under review when the murders occurred. Neighbors had also reported odd behavior. One neighbor said the children were rarely allowed outside. Another said he saw Marlene dragging one of the girls by her hair into the house. But no official complaints had ever been filed. In small towns, people looked the other way, and the Whitakers were respected. 2 respected. Of the 5 foster children, 3 were found dead in the basement. The other 2 were missing, 14-year-old Grace and 10-year-old Elijah. The entire country began to search. Amber alerts went out. Helicopters circled. Border agents were put on notice. But the days passed, then a week, then 2. No sign of Tom. No sign of Marlene, and no sign of the kids. That is, until Grace walked into a gas station in El Paso, Texas. Barefoot, shivering, covered in dried blood. Grace didn't cry. She didn't scream. She sat down on the cold floor of the police station and whispered, "I waited until they fell asleep." Then she told her story. How Tom kept them in the basement for God's punishment. How Marlene made them kneel on rice for hours. How they weren't allowed to eat without permission. And if they disobeyed, the punishment was the box. The box, she said, was a dog crate, with no light, no sound, no food. Then she said something that made every detective in the room go still. They said they had to kill the others because they knew too much. According to Grace, The murder happened on a Sunday night. Tom had been drinking. He told the children they had sinned by speaking to a school counselor about what went on in the house. He said Satan had taken over the younger ones. Marlene cried, Grace said. But she didn't stop him. She helped. Grace said she and Elijah were told they would be saved for later. They were sedated. When she woke up in the back of a van, they were in the desert. She waited until they stopped at a roadside motel. Waited until both parents were asleep. Then she ran. Grace couldn't remember the last thing she saw before she ran. But she did remember Elijah saying, I think they're going to bury us. As search teams combed the desert, the FBI put out a nationwide warrant for Tom and Marlene Whitaker. Elijah remained missing, and so did the people who had once been called angels in the community. Back in Missouri, investigators searched the Whitaker property. Underneath the garden shed, they found a hidden room, a 6x6 bunker built into the ground, lined with foam and locked from the outside. Inside were chains on the wall, scratch marks on the floor, and a journal, not from a child, from Marlene. I love them like my own, but Tom says we have to do this. God will forgive us. Grace is strong. Elijah is still innocent. The others, they've been touched by darkness. It was a confession. It was delusion. It was the beginning of a story that no one, no matter how hardened, could forget. It was just after 4 a.m. A clerk at a 24-hour gas station in El Paso was wiping down the coffee counter when the glass door creaked open. She looked up and froze. A girl, barefoot, pale, bruised, stood there. Her hair was tangled. Her legs were scraped raw. Blood crusted her arms. She looked no older than 14. I need help, she whispered. It was Grace Whitaker, one of the 2 missing foster children, and she had just survived something unthinkable. The footage would later go viral. In it, Grace walks in, dazed and trembling. The clerk tries to ask if she's hurt. Grace nods slowly. Then she says 4 words that shake the local police department to its core. They killed the others. Within 20 minutes, the police arrive. Grace doesn't fight them. She doesn't cry. She doesn't even blink when they ask if her foster parents did this. She simply says, yes. She had been in that van for nearly 2 days, sleeping on the floor, eating crackers, stopping only for gas and motel rooms. Tom Whitaker drove most of the time. Marlene sat in the back, holding Elijah, telling him everything was fine. They said we were going somewhere safe, Grace told officers later. Someplace where the police wouldn't find us. Someplace where God would forgive us. Forgive them for what? Grace didn't answer that yet. But when detectives searched the abandoned van found 2 towns away the next day, they got part of the answer. The passenger seatbelt was stiff with dried blood. A pink hoodie, belonging to 10-year-old Elijah, was stuffed under the seat. In the trunk, a shovel. Beside it, a torn Bible page. From Leviticus, the soul who sins shall die. The motel they stayed in had cameras. Footage showed Tom pacing the lot at 3 a.m. Marlene sat by the window with a Bible in her lap. But there was something else. Audio. From a baby monitor they had brought inside. One that picked up audio from the van parked right outside. Investigators enhanced it. At 2:47 a.m., a voice whispered, "We can't bring him. He saw what we did." Then silence. Then sobbing. Then Tom. Then you know what needs to happen. Grace didn't know exactly where they were when it happened. But she remembered the sand, the stars, and her mother whispering something about salvation. Search dogs and FBI drones scanned the border region. 3 days later, they found him. Elijah Whitaker, 10 years old, wrapped in a hotel sheet, buried under 6 inches of sand in the New Mexico desert. His wrists were bruised, his face peaceful, as if he never fought. The autopsy revealed he had been smothered. No struggle, no resistance, as if he trusted the person who killed him. Inside a trash can near the motel, police found torn-up notebook pages. They weren't Grace's. They weren't Tom's. They were written in Marlene's handwriting. We didn't want to hurt them. We only wanted to save them from this world. The younger ones, too soft, The older ones, too defiant. Grace is strong. She will understand someday. She had signed the final page. We did it for love. Now it wasn't just a murder investigation. It was a manhunt. The FBI issued a nationwide bolo, be on the lookout, alert for Tom and Marlene Whitaker, armed, dangerous, and moving across state lines. Interpol was notified. Billboards went up across Texas and New Mexico with their faces on them. Tips flooded in, but the trail kept going cold. They were always one step ahead. Back at the children's hospital, Grace finally told the full story. She said the abuse started 2 years earlier. Tom had become obsessed with the idea that some of the foster kids were corrupted by the outside world. He believed that public school was poisoning their souls. He pulled them out and started homeschooling. But homeschooling was a lie. There were no lessons, no books, just Bible readings and punishments. Hours spent in the prayer room, which was just the basement, cold, damp, and locked. If someone cried too much, no food for a day. If someone asked to leave, the box. The house was searched again. Underneath the floorboards in the master bedroom, detectives found 4 phones, all burned inside. But the memory cards survived. On those cards, hundreds of photos. The children, bruised, blindfolded, kneeling. One image showed Marlene with a belt in hand. Another showed Tom's face reflected in a basement mirror, expressionless, holding a flashlight. The most disturbing, a photo of Elijah, 2 days before he died, holding a sign that read, "I told the truth." When the story hit the news, the town collapsed. The same church that had once praised the Whitakers now held candlelight vigils for the murdered children. Mothers wept on camera, apologizing for ever trusting them. Former foster children started coming forward, telling their own stories of emotional abuse and manipulation in the Whitaker household. One girl, now 19, told reporters, "I tried to tell people. No one listened. Everyone thought they were perfect." After nearly 3 weeks on the run, a call came in. It was a truck stop waitress near Flagstaff, Arizona. She said a couple matching the Whitakers' description had stopped in, bought gas, used cash, but left something behind in the booth. A piece of paper with a bus schedule, just like the one found in their house. One of the routes was circled in red. Nogales, Mexico. U.S. Marshals, Border Patrol, and the FBI mobilized. The next day, security cameras at the Nogales bus terminal caught them on tape. Tom was wearing a baseball cap. Marlene had dyed her hair black, but it was them. They were standing in line, 2 tickets in hand, less than 50 feet from the Mexican border. When federal agents approached, Tom ran. Marlene didn't. She raised her hands, whispered, "It's over," and sank to her knees. Tom didn't get far. He was tackled just outside the terminal by 2 marshals. In his backpack, 2 more burner phones, another bus schedule, and a handwritten note that read, "They'll never understand. We saved them." For more chilling true crime stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Before the nation knew them as fugitives, Tom and Marlene Whitaker were the picture of virtue. Church leaders, PTA volunteers, foster parents to nearly a dozen children over the span of a decade. Their Christmas cards were hand-signed. Their Facebook pages flooded with scripture quotes and smiling selfies of family camping trips. But behind that camera lens, something darker was growing. It wasn't just abuse. It was doctrine. Grace told investigators that sometime around her 12th birthday, Tom started talking about something he called the sanctuary doctrine. It wasn't from church. It wasn't from any Bible study. It was something Tom had written himself. A 78-page handwritten manifesto. In it, Tom laid out a set of laws and punishments. Children who lied were to be cleansed with silence. Children who defied were to be washed with prayer. Children who tried to run, they were no longer children. They were enemies. He preached this doctrine every Sunday in their living room. Marlene would sit beside him, silent, nodding. Grace once asked her why they couldn't just go to a real church. Marlene answered, "Because God only speaks to us now. Tom and Marlene pulled down every photo of the children's biological families, erased their names from school forms, made them memorize new birthdays, new last names. "You're a Whitaker now," Tom would say. "Your old life was a lie." But Grace remembered. She remembered her mother's perfume, the way her real dad used to hum when fixing the sink. She wrote those memories down, on scraps of tissue, inside shampoo bottles, behind drawer linings. She didn't know why. She just knew that if she stopped writing, she might forget who she really was. Fairfax County Child Protective Services had visited the Whitaker home 3 times in 5 years. Each time, the house was spotless. The children coached. Grace later said they had inspection rehearsals. If anyone asked if they were safe, they were to smile. If asked about school, say they were homeschooled through a Christian academy. If asked about bruises, say they fell while playing. Tom even had a code word: blessed. If a social worker asked a question that was too risky, he'd nod, and the child would respond with something like, "We're blessed to be here." The phrase appeared over and over again in inspection notes. We are blessed. Feeling blessed. Couldn't be more blessed. But it wasn't a blessing. It was a script. Then came Jasmine Clark. Now 22. She had stayed with the Whitakers for just 8 months at age 16. She had run away, but no one had ever asked why. When she saw the news coverage, she reached out. "They kept us in line with food," she said. "Only the obedient kids got full meals. The rest of US got rice and water." She described nights locked in the garage, wrapped in sleeping bags on concrete floors. She described the constant surveillance, cameras in the hallways, even in the bathroom. "They said if we ever told, we'd go to hell." Her interview aired on national news. And then the dominoes fell. A whistleblower inside the state's foster care licensing board leaked internal documents to a journalist at the Houston Chronicle. It turned out Tom and Marlene had been reported 5 separate times. Bruises, isolation, emotional manipulation. But each time the case was closed. Why? Because the Whitakers were highly regarded. Because they provided a faith-based home. Because no one ever stayed long enough to testify. Until now. Grace's statement was 42 pages long, detailed, chronological, undeniable. Digging into state archives, the FBI found something else. Between 2012 and 2022, the Whitakers had fostered 12 children. Only 8 were accounted for had aged out. 2 were adopted elsewhere. 2, Grace and Elijah, were now at the center of the storm. But what about the remaining 4? The records were vague. One child, Bethany J., was listed as having left the program. Another, Ramon D., was transferred to a youth home. No paperwork filed. The last 2, no trace. Their names were redacted. But Jasmine remembered. "Bethany had seizures," she said. "Tom thought she was possessed. One night, she had an episode, and when I woke up the next day, her bed was empty." When she asked where Bethany had gone, Marlene told her, "She's with the angels now." Cadaver dogs were brought in to search the Whitaker property. In the backyard, beneath the flower beds, soil tested positive for human remains. So far, only partial skeletal fragments have been recovered. DNA testing is underway, but the bones appear to belong to children. And suddenly, it wasn't just about Elijah. It wasn't just about Grace. It was about how many. On Marlene's phone, recovered from her purse during the arrest, detectives found a notes app with only one entry. It read, "Forgive us for the ones who could not be saved." Underneath were 5 names: Elijah, Bethany, Ramon. 2 others, initials only. One name was circled, Grace. When investigators returned to the Whitaker home, they brought more than cadaver dogs. They brought ground-penetrating radar. And what they found beneath the house would upend the entire narrative. The floorboards in the basement were newer than the rest of the home, cleaner with different nails. When agents pulled them up, they discovered a false subfloor. Beneath it, a small, windowless room, just 6 feet wide. A twin mattress on the ground. A bucket. A single Bible duct-taped to the wall. There were fingernail scratches on the door, and the initials EW etched into the wood. Elijah Whitaker. But Elijah wasn't dead. At least not yet. In a battered metal box hidden behind insulation, the FBI found a stack of SD cards. They contained over 30 hours of footage. Elijah had recorded himself using a smuggled GoPro, stolen from one of Tom's work kits. The videos show him in that room, whispering into the camera, his voice barely audible. "This is day 14, I think. No food today. Water had bleach in it. Each video is timestamped. Each ends the same way. I'm sorry, Grace. If you find this, run." The last recording is the most haunting. Elijah is crying, but smiling. "They told me I wasn't really a Whitaker anymore, that I failed the test. But if you're watching this, Grace, then we won. We told the truth." With the videos authenticated, federal prosecutors convened a grand jury. Tom and Marlene were indicted on multiple counts: aggravated child endangerment, felony abuse, manslaughter, tampering with a corpse, interstate flight to avoid prosecution. But it didn't stop there. When the footage went public, a new wave of former foster children came forward. 7 in total. All had stories that mirrored Grace and Jasmine's. One had permanent hearing loss from being locked in a closet with a white noise machine at max volume. Another had burns on his legs from kneeling on rice as punishment. All had one thing in common: they were told not to remember who they were. In Tom's handwriting, tucked inside his Bible, agents discovered a list titled "The Faithful Ones." It included detailed ratings of each child who had lived with them, notes beside each name. Obeys Scripture 8 out of 10. Rebellious, spiritual warfare required. Ready for fire soon. Ready for fire? Investigators believe it was a code. Tom and Marlene believed that disobedient children needed to be refined by holy flame. A twisted metaphor that now has literal implications, given the burned remains found beneath the garden. The prosecutors called it what it was: religiously justified homicide. Meanwhile, Grace was placed in a safe house. She hadn't spoken since the arrest, refused meals, refused therapy. But when shown Elijah's final recording, she broke. She whispered, "He kept the promise." Then she said something strange. "He buried something under the tree." Back at the property, beneath a large oak tree in the front yard, a forensic team began digging. They found a plastic container wrapped in duct tape. Inside, dozens of photos. Most were Polaroids, faded, grainy, all showing the foster kids in ordinary moments, eating cereal, riding bikes, watching cartoons. On the back of each photo, Elijah had written their real names. He had preserved their identities. For the children who had none, the story dominated headlines. House of Prayer or House of Horror? Foster system failed these children again. Who watched the watchers? Protests erupted outside Fairfax County CPS. Hundreds gathered holding signs. "We believe Grace. Children are not sacrifices. No more silence." Lawmakers scrambled to explain how a couple could foster over a dozen children without anyone raising alarms. But people weren't just angry. They were devastated. Because this wasn't just about the Whitakers. It was about every child who disappears into the system and never comes out. As Tom and Marlene sat in federal custody, refusing to speak, the nation waited. DNA testing on the remains had confirmed 2 identities: Bethany J. and Ramon D. But there were still 3 sets of bones unaccounted for. 3 children. No names, no faces, no photos. Grace was asked if she knew them. She looked down and said quietly, "No, but Elijah did." Tom and Marlene Whitaker's trial is set for October. They've pled not guilty to all charges. Their defense? That they were practicing their faith. That the children were lost and needed discipline. That they never killed anyone. But the evidence says otherwise. So does Elijah's voice. And Grace? She'll be the star witness. Because now, she remembers everything. And this time, no one can silence her. The courtroom was silent. Not the kind of silence that comes from order, but the kind that weighs down the air like fog. Thick, watching, waiting. On the witness stand sat Grace Whitaker, no longer the trembling girl from the sanctuary basement. No longer the child raised under false scriptures and silent screams. She was 17 now, but her voice echoed like someone twice her age. She began, "My name is Grace, my real name, and I remember everything." The prosecution didn't begin with bones. They didn't begin with burned journals, buried boxes, or SD card footage. They began with a single sentence from the defendant's own words, found in Marlene's prison diary, scrawled in barely legible handwriting. "If we don't act now, we risk another betrayal like Elijah's." He knew too much. This sentence painted intent, and paired with the forensic evidence, Grace's testimony, and the secret recordings, it formed a noose around Tom and Marlene's carefully constructed lies. Grace testified for over 6 hours. She spoke about how Marlene would monitor their conversations through hidden baby monitors, how the children were forced to memorize scripture as punishment, how any mention of their biological parents meant 3 days of silence and isolation. She described the cleansing room, the locked basement closet where Elijah spent weeks at a time. She explained the holy orders, a set of behavioral rankings that dictated who ate first, who slept on mattresses, and who got to speak at family meals. The more obedient you were, the more human you were allowed to be. Then came the detail no one expected. Grace told the court about a night she called the family ceremony. Once a year, Tom would gather all the foster children in the living room. He would wear white. The children wore dark colors. He would hold a candle and make each child repeat the same phrase. "I am reborn through obedience. My pain is my teacher. My silence is my strength." If anyone messed up the line, they were taken to the cleansing room. Elijah messed up once. He stuttered on the second sentence. Grace said he was gone for 2 weeks after that. When he returned, he wasn't the same. Tom and Marlene's defense team tried to discredit Grace. They said she was traumatized, unreliable, manipulated by media attention. But then, the prosecution played a never-before-seen video. In it, Tom sits in the family's living room, sermonizing to an invisible congregation, his foster children. "You are not children. You are vessels. God speaks through me, and I will purify your souls. If your old names return to you, that is the devil calling. We must erase the past to secure the future." The jury watched in stunned silence. Marlene sits in the background, silent, smiling. On the 4th day of the trial, something strange happened. A man arrived in the courtroom gallery, mid-30s, quiet, wearing a hat pulled low. He waited until court recessed. Then he approached the DA and handed them a sealed envelope. Inside was a birth certificate. Name Micah James Whitaker. Date of birth 2009. Biological mother unknown. Placement foster home, Whitaker household. Status missing. The man whispered only one sentence before walking away. "I was his brother." That night, the FBI reopened the case. There might be more children, more than 12, more than what anyone knew. Took the jury 9 hours. They returned with 31 guilty counts. Tom and Marlene Whitaker were convicted of second-degree murder, child endangerment, felony abuse, obstruction of justice, fraudulent adoption practices. They were each sentenced to 6 life sentences without parole. But for many, it wasn't enough, because no matter how many sentences were handed down, some children were still missing, some names still redacted, some identities still buried. After the trial, Grace declined interviews. She was placed into a private guardianship in another state under a new name. But she wrote one letter. It was addressed to Jasmine Clark and read, "We survived because we remembered. The truth doesn't die. The past is not who we are. I kept the names. I kept the stories. They will never be forgotten." She signed it simply, G. In the months that followed, sweeping reforms hit the foster care system in Texas and across the U.S. Background check standards were raised. Surprise inspections became mandatory. Psychological evaluations were implemented for all foster parents annually. The Grace Act was passed in her honor, a bill requiring child advocates to have direct and private monthly interviews with each foster child. But for every Grace that speaks, there are dozens who cannot. The Whitaker home is now abandoned. Windows shattered. The paint peeled. Yellow crime scene tape still clings to a few posts like dead vines. But inside, in the corner of the basement, beneath the floorboard where Elijah once slept, someone carved something into the wall. We were real. We were here. And we remember. That sentence, etched in splintered wood, may never make it into a courtroom, but it made it into history. For more chilling true crime stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel.